Baldeep Singh Sahota, and I've been in the House of Lords for the last 7-8 months. And welcome to House of Lords, and each and every one of you. Welcome, welcome, if you haven't been here before. I've been here 7 months, and I get lost as well in all these coming. I just want to touch on when the Bloom report came out last April, many communities had their own views and some were upset. And when I read it, I was rather intrigued and bemused by his finding. On one hand, he praised the Sikh community to the rafters for their valuable contribution to this country, and on the other hand, he said some other things as well. When I was told by Baldeep Singh, he's the chair of the Sikhs in law. I met him some months ago when the organisation was set up. And they were undertaking their own review of the Bloom report. I was pleased to see that the British Sikhs are engaging in British democracy in this way. As a parliamentarian, we are selected to be the voice of the people, and as such, I'm honoured to be hosting this event and look forward to hearing the judgment. I haven't seen the judgment, I haven't seen the papers. This judgment is led by some of the most distinguished and leading academics and legal minds. So welcome to all the distinguished legal minds and academics. And before I hand over to Baldeep Singh, I think in the recent weeks we've been having some floods in Punjab and there have been some victims. I think we ought to stand in silence for 1 minute in the memory of those who passed away from Punjab. Okay, I hand over to Baldeep Singh, who is a barrister and chair of the Sikhs in law.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lord Sahota. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, honourable members of Parliament, and all of our distinguished guests here today. The Council of Sikhs in Law was founded not only to promote, encourage access to the legal profession, but also to bring lawmakers, law enforcement, solicitors, barristers and judges together. Our fourth aim remains our commitment to ensure responsible and respectful coverage of the Sikh community. The Sikh community were aggrieved by the Bloom report and asked us to review that document. The Council appointed an independent select committee to review that report. I now call upon Professor Satvinder Singh Chas, Dr. Dalveer Kaur Gill and Dr. Gurnan Singh to present their findings.
Thank you. This is the thank you for that. This is the response of the select committee appointed by Sikhs in Law in relation to the Bloom review. It was Prime Minister Boris Johnson who back in 2019 appointed an independent faith engagement advisor. This was in the person of Mr. Colin Bloom, and he was to make recommendations to the Secretary of State for communities for levelling up housing and communities on how faith engagement can be improved. This would be in terms of recognising the contribution of faith communities in ensuring fair treatment when using or working in public service and in addressing harmful practices linked to faith. The final report, also known as the Bloom Review, drew upon 21,000 responses, and it was published quite recently on the 26th of April 2023 in a document ambitiously titled, "Does Government Do God? An independent review into how government engages with faith." Running into no less than 60,000 words in 159 pages, it contains 22 recommendations, one of which, recommendation 16, specifically relates to Sikhs, on the question of whether government is properly engaging with people of faith. We believe that despite its avowed declaration, this is exactly how the government should not do faith, should not do God. It's the direct opposite of how the government should be engaged with matters of faith. There is nevertheless much to commend in the Bloom Review. It tackles difficult subjects, from forced marriage to radicalization in prison. Sadly, however, the Bloom Review deprives itself of its enduring value because of the obsession with faith-based extremism, and specifically in the way in which it targets the Sikhs. And this is in chapter 6 of the review, the chapter that this particular select committee is principally concerned with. And for this reason, Sikhs in Law has commissioned this report specifically in relation to concerns arising within the Sikh community, which have already been mentioned, in the manner in which they have been targeted in this chapter 6. Bloom relies on two concepts as the building blocks of his review of the Sikh faith. And they're vitally important concepts to both understand, engage with, and grapple with. The first is subversiveness, and the second is that of an extremist. We have absolutely no hesitation in saying at the outset that Bloom is wrong in the way he uses both these epithets to describe Sikhs in the UK. First, let us take the label subversive. The shorter Oxford English Dictionary definition of subversive is, and I quote, trying or likely to destroy or damage a government or political system by attacking it secretly or indirectly. Bloom presents no evidence that Sikh activity in the UK, where freedom of expression, protest, demonstration is widely recognised, is actually designed in any way to destroy or damage the UK government or its political system in any way whatsoever. So that simply fails on its own definition. You use the word subversive and then you find you cannot back it up. Secondly, with respect to extremism, Bloom asserts that there is no legal definition, which is not to say that there isn't a workable definition, because there is. The government of this country has used the definition in the prevent strategy. And what one finds in the prevent strategy in relation to that behavior, which is extremist, is that it is in the form of, and again I quote, a vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, unquote. These are not the values of a foreign state, of a third state. Otherwise, no one would be able to protest against Russian aggression or against Brexit outside Parliament. Fundamental to British values is the right to protest. And there is absolutely nothing here that demonstrates that any vocal or active opposition, such as it is, actually sets out to undermine fundamental British values in a country where Sikhs have made their home and which they proudly refer to as their home. It is not a reference to a foreign state, as I say, and there is nothing which undermines British values. The third point that we thought we should also make is this, and it is important that we make it. Insofar as there is criminal activity, that properly falls within the purview of the criminal law. And the state already has adequate means at hand to deal with such criminal activity through the regular courts. And so if people are breaking the law, you bring the entire weight of the law to apply to them, and that's it. And that applies as much to anyone who is overly zealous in relation to protests in favor of Ukraine against Russian aggression as it does to Sikh activity. It is against this background, therefore, that we were asked to assess the Bloom Review, because the Sikh community petitioned the Council of Sikhs in Law to assess the Bloom Review, which had a specific concern in relation, as I've already pointed out, to Chapter 6. Now, what is the first point to note in relation to Chapter 6, which is so glaringly obvious, is that no less than 13 pages are allocated to the Sikh extremism, compared to about half a page to other faiths, including what is referred to as Hindu nationalism. Be it noted, not Hindu extremism, but always Hindu nationalism. The Council of Sikhs in Law appointed an independent select committee consisting of academic and legal minds to consider the community's grievance in this regard. A notice calling for evidence was put out on the 12th of June 2023. There was an overwhelming response from both lawyers, academics, members of the community. All of that was received, and then a notice was also at the same time sent out to Mr. Colin Bloom, to which no acknowledgement or response was received or has been received to date. The Sikhs in Law Select Committee then convened a meeting on the 2nd of July 2023 at 33 Bedford Row in London. It heard lengthy oral and written evidence, a mass of submissions, and the committee then retired to review that information and data in order to make its assessment and draw its conclusions. The Select Committee now presents its findings in writing before the Honourable Council. First, the executive summary. The Bloom Review opens with the observation that, and I quote, nearly 20 years ago, a former Prime Minister's spin doctor famously replied to a Vanity Fair journalist, "I'm sorry, we don't do God," he exclaimed, and how the Bloom Review says how for many people of faith it has become a cultural reference point, confirming their suspicions that government neither understands faith and, crucially, nor does it particularly want to. The Bloom Review, we have concluded, is actually a blueprint for exactly how the government should not do God. The View makes the bold assertion that, quote, this is the first time that faith has been reviewed in this way, and the first time in living memory that an administration has bravely asked, are we properly engaging with people of faith? Bravely or not, this is exactly how the government should not engage with faith. It might not have occurred to Mr. Colin Bloom that the reason why this is the first time and that never before now has a government ventured into this territory was precisely because it was better to leave well alone. There are three principal reasons why we have taken exception to the Bloom Review. First, Colin Bloom is not a scholar of religion, and nor is he independent and impartial. Whilst he is with the faith engagement advisor to the Minister of Housing, Communities and Local Government, he previously served not only as the Executive Director of the Conservative Christian Fellowship, but also, be it noted, the Director of Christians in Politics. This raises a dangerous possibility of bias and demonstrably shows a lack of independence in faith. Now, it's not just us who are saying this, in case the charge be levied against us. Recently, the Evangelical Alliance, which heads some 3,400 churches in this country, has also opined in the following terms, quote, the Bloom Review has ignited an important conversation about faith engagement at the centre of government, unquote. But the Evangelical Alliance is troubled by the use of biblical references. Its head of policy notes how, whereas the Bible does point out how we should, quote, beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves, unquote. The use of such language where there are recommendations to be made to the government is inappropriate. And this is what the Evangelical Alliance writes. As Christians, the language of apostate and heretic is familiar to us because of the Bible's teachings on such matters. However, to read such words in a report to the UK government is alarming, particularly where there is such a strong position against such language and an expectation for the government to watch out for such use of language in the context of religious extremism. In the context of religious extremism. Precisely the error in which Colin Bloom falls in. He deals with religious extremism and he uses the language of heretics and apostasy. Need one say more? Well, we need to say more because I come now to our second point. Secondly, Bloom's methodology is unconventional and unorthodox, to put it mildly. He begins with the declaration, there are three types of believers. The first are true believers, who regardless of their faith are sincere, devout and peaceful. Government can and should work with true believers. The second are non-believers, who like true believers are generally sincere, peaceful and decent. True believers are part of the solution to improving society. The third are make-believers. Make-believers are generally the cause of most of the problems that government encounters in the faith space. Make-believers are often motivated by ego, money, prestige, or power, and abuse their position to promote themselves for their causes, clothing them with religion to give them divine legitimacy, unquote. There is not a citation given for this. If you're going to divide up your cohort into a tripartite division of believers, non-believers, and make-believers, you need a citation for this. You need a reference for this. You can't just conjure this up, and this is exactly what has happened here. And Colin Bloom does not just stop there. He goes on to say that these make-believers are, quote, the cause of most of the problems that government encounters, unquote. Where is a citation for that? There is no citation. Where did the government ever say that we are encountering a problem with these make-believers, but not people of true religion? The second problem with this is this, and this is clearly to be discernible from Colin Bloom's own background. The concept of belief is central to Judeo-Christian tradition. It is absent in the case of Eastern religions, where the focus is very much on a way of life, on a tradition and the following of rituals. Eastern religions, therefore, do not fixate on matters of belief. And to simply trace one's analysis from the footing of those who are believers, whether true or untrue, and those who are not, overlooks the fact that religions like Jainism and Buddhism are in fact very secular, agnostic religions. And that's the second error that flows directly from the fact that he is not independent and impartial. Third, and this perhaps is the most important thing I'm going to point out, is the question of how this methodology was undertaken. And this really is vitally important, because on the 6th of July 2023, after we had met at 33 Bedford Road, there was a question put to the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Well, it was a series of questions, and here are the questions that are worth pondering over. Question 1. For what reason his department decided that the Independent Faith Engagement Review call for evidence should be open for 28 days, and whether he sought independent advice on this decision? You recall that most such reviews run for months in collating evidence. 28 days is less than a month. Secondly, what questions were asked to faith communities during interviews for the Independent Faith Engagement Review? Thirdly, who responded to the call for evidence for the Independent Faith Engagement Review? Fourth, who gave evidence in person to the Independent Faith Engagement Review? Fifth, how many and what proportion of those people who provided written evidence through the call for evidence? Sixth, how many and what proportion of A, respondents to the call for evidence, and B, people who gave evidence in person to the Independent Faith Engagement Review were from the Sikh community? And last but not least, six, with which faith organization the government has a policy of not engaging? You will see as we get to the evidence that there is much disquiet behind me amongst people who claim that the government deals only with particular organizations and individuals, and there are others who have grassroots bases that are simply not inquired into. I'll come to that in a moment. Now, on the 14th of July 2023, an answer was provided to a series of questions by Dehan Davison, and she replied as follows. Quote, that as an independent reviewer, Colin Bloom was free to meet with any individuals or organizations he chose to inform his review, unquote. And that, quote, he was not under any obligation to inform officials, I assume by that he means parliamentary and other governmental officials, of his meetings or to pass on any written evidence. I repeat, or to pass on any written evidence, unquote. He was, quote, an independent reviewer, unquote. And so he, quote, met with a wide range of stakeholders, including charities, organizations, academics, and other sectoral experts and key individuals of all faiths and none, whom he deemed to have relevant insight into particular themes relevant to his report. unquote. Nevertheless, reminds us Dehan Davison, quote, given the sensitive issues covered in his review, Colin Bloom was committed to preserving respondents' anonymity so they could speak freely, unquote. And that, quote, again, while these anonymized sources and external analysis have informed the review, the views and recommendations expressed are Mr. Bloom's own, unquote. Before one begins to ponder why the views being put forward to the government should be those of Colin Bloom's own, i.e. of a single individual, Dehan Davison explained, quote, the call for evidence was conducted in adherence with the Cabinet Office's consultation principles, including consideration of the length of consultation, unquote, and the reference was made by her to how, quote, given the sheer volume of responses, over 20,000, well, 20,000 is not that luminous, I might add, of the length of consultation period clearly provided sufficient time for individuals and organizations to respond. Well, there are a great many people sitting behind me that weren't consulted. And so to suggest that that clearly provided sufficient time for individuals and organizations to respond is rather begs the question. This select committee, commissioned by Sikhs in Law, will consider below whether such a claim is sustainable or not. For the moment, it may be noted, and here I come to the most important part, that Davison did then proceed to provide us with some real gold nuggets, some real pieces of information, revealing, quote, breakdown of respondents by declared faith, unquote, which we learn was as follows. Christians comprised nearly half of Colin Bloom's review at 47.1%, numbering 9,874 people who were interviewed. One of the criticisms made not by us, by someone else I'll come to, is how little is said about Christians in the report, how little is said about clerical abuse, where the church remains dogged with numerous complaints of that kind, and virtually nothing is said about that. So already in a report which targets Sikhs particularly, 50% of the respondents are of the Christian faith alone. Hindus are half that figure at 12%, numbering 2,522. Sikhs come even behind atheists, humanists, and, I kid you not, pagans, at a paltry 1.69%, numbering 354 respondents. Now, before you fall off your seat, let me remind you of this as well, that the 2021 census showed that there are approximately 524,000 people in England and Wales who identify as Sikh. That census also told us that there are approximately 250 gurdwaras in the UK, with the largest able to accommodate 3,000 worshippers. And Bloom could not go to a single one of these gurdwaras and go beyond the 354 respondents to speak to. He's only able to speak with 354. And even then, as Dehan Davison tells us, he was, and I quote, under no obligation to inform officials of his meetings or to pass on any written evidence, unquote, choosing himself to decide who, quote, he deemed to have relevant insight, unquote, so that as, quote, an independent reviewer, unquote, armed with his own, quote, anonymized sources and external analysis, unquote, we can be assured that when it comes to what the Bloom Review has to say about Sikh subversive and Sikh extremist behavior, we should remember that, quote, the views and recommendations expressed are Bloom's own, unquote. And yet, remarkably, the government is inviting the Bloom, sorry, I beg your pardon, remarkably, Bloom is inviting the government in chapter 16 to actually engage with Sikhs on the basis of improved faith literacy across government and the parliamentary state, particularly on intra-faith issues, so the government can be more discerning regarding engagement and representation within British Sikh communities. That is a charter not of faith literacy, but of faith illiteracy. Nevertheless, on the day that Bloom reported, on the 26th of April 2023, the government website immediately went on to proclaim this report as, quote, a landmark review into faith engagement, unquote. And whilst it added that Bloom recognizes religion to be, quote, a force for good, unquote, it also adds that, quote, a better understanding of faith should also equip government to tackle issues such as forced marriage, radicalization in prison, and faith-based extremism, including the ongoing challenge of Islamist extremism and the small but growing trends of Sikh extremism and Hindu nationalism. So it's Sikh extremism and Hindu nationalism, always in that form and manner. Never Hindu extremism or never Sikh nationalism, always Sikh extremism and Hindu nationalism. That, as we've said, is all very well, except that there are then 13 pages compared to half a page with other religions that is devoted to the Sikh faith.
Professor Just, if I may interrupt for a moment before you carry on with your delivery, Lord Singh
says to go.
I have to go to another meeting. If I could make some comments. I don't know how long you are.
Well, I've been asked to take 45 minutes, but
if I could make
I'm sure we will all benefit from your...
I would be very impressed if you were making a case in law with your manner of presentation. But I am disappointed that I felt that this would be an objective look at the good and the bad in the Bloom report. And all I want to say is, I mean, asides like accusing him of using Christian language, of wolf in sheep's clothing, that sort of thing is common currency of language. It's not Christian, it is the language of the country. And there are many things like that. But if I can just put my own just a couple of minutes on the report. Generally, it is a wake-up call for the Sikh community that there are some people in the community that are giving Sikhs a bad name. Sikhs who he praises extraordinarily more than any other religion in the report. They're giving a bad name. And we can close our eyes and look the other way. But I know of people who have been threatened, who have been beaten up, and I know of one broadcaster who was beaten up so badly that he is permanently disabled. So we shouldn't close our eyes to that, to the bad in our community. We should look to the things we can do. It's an independent report. It's said almost accusingly, this is an independent report. That is what it's meant to be, a report for discussion. Now, there's some things in there that I'm not happy about. One is the failure to grasp the feeling in the community about the atrocities in 1984 and the lingering residual hurt that has caused. He talks about Khalistanis. Well, at that time, every Sikh was a Khalistani, because Khalistan was a protest word against the actions of the Indian government. Now, the whole concept of Khalistan is something for a discussion. I personally feel that Sikhism teaches totally against the concept of religious states. In our Guru Granth Sahib, we have writings of Hindu, Muslim saints, and so on. Now, you see, he's got the feeling wrong there. He doesn't sense the hurt in the Sikh community. People can argue for Khalistan, but they should do it sensibly and not by shouting and breaking windows. That is not a part of the British way of life. It doesn't do us any good. And then the other thing is on marriages. In a Gurdwara, we take a solemn pledge in the Anandkaran ceremony to be true to Sikh teachings, being thick. That's repeated 4 times as we go around in the Law, that we bow before the Guru Granth Sahib, a solemn pledge to abide by Sikh teachings. The idea of a Sikh and a non-Sikh getting married in a Gurdwara is wrong, and he seems to say,
I think, can we
why
get
not?
point of order? I think we need to get back.
Yeah.
I'm just
It's important.
Just one
since-
moment, let me finish.
It's not about personal opinion.
On that, he has got it wrong. It is that. What is wrong is the people breaking and shouting and upsetting people.
My Lord Singh of Wimbledon,
Just one
if I
moment,
may,
I'm
call
just
point of
finishing.
order.
I'm
The
just finishing.
purpose of the review today is to hand down our findings.
Yes, it
To
is,
give
I know.
evidence was
I know.
2 weeks ago, of which you were invited to attend, my Lord. So if I can ask Professor Chust to continue
There's many things I mean,
delivering his
like,
findings.
just on the last point before I get up and go, is that it is the Gurdwara management that encourages that sort of mixed marriage in a Gurdwara because they want income. Sikhs should take the Gurdwara management to task over them.
Lord Singh, you mustn't get up and go because you must give me the courtesy of
Go on, let's
responding
make it
to those
quickly.
points. Firstly, you yourself, as I've quoted in this report, have been critical of the Bloom Review by an interview you gave that 30 pages had been given to Sikh extremism. Secondly, the reference to that it is a Christian way, I made it quite clear. The Evangelical Alliance said that the use of Christian language of apostasy and heretics was inappropriate in a recommendation. Thirdly, if I may, you charged me for, despite my eloquence of not being emphatic enough, and perhaps I wasn't. But actually, in point of fact, the reason I've painstakingly referred to quotation after quotation is to show my objectivity. These are words used by Bloom, these are words used by others. So it's entirely objective. And finally, the point which I think has been missed with great respect by yourself, whereas it is the case that all communities have thugs and hoodlums and others who get up to no good and so on and so forth. The point about this report is this: if windows are being broken, what on earth has that got to do with subversive activity and pro-Khalistani activity? The whole point here is this. The whole point here is this. The whole point here is this: that when dealing with matters such as the Leamington Spa incident and so on, in the cases into pro-Khalistani sections, that's the point about it. That's the point about it.
Thank you very much. Professor Just, please continue to deliver your findings. Thank you very much.
Right.
So we were, I think.
Paragraph 14.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Apology 16.
Yes, I made the point that really the 13 pages were allocated to the Sikh faith and the reference to other religions such as Hindu nationalism. One of the points we make is this in the Bloom Review is that there has been a investigation by the Charity Commission with respect to the activities of a Hindu organization with respect to an event, and again this is fully documented, Sunday 26 July 2014 to Monday 3rd August 2014, when Hindu history classes were recorded by an undercover journalist working for Hard Cash in a broadcast charities behaving badly. And what the Charity Commission found here was this, quote, "The speaker's comments were wholly inappropriate and unacceptable at an event run by a charity," unquote. And that, quote, "The trustees need to take proactive steps to ensure RSS has no control or influence over the charity and its affairs." Now, unquote. The reason I mention that is simply this, that whereas a reference once again is to Sikh extremism, the reference here is only to Hindu nationalism. And not only that, to talk about the even-handedness of the report. This is what Colin Bloom has to say in relation to this. He says that, quote, "Nationalist movements within the British Hindu diaspora have become somewhat more prevalent in recent years," unquote. But he seems to think that there is nothing to worry about this in this regard because that Hindu nationalist activity, quote, "can be seen in the sophisticated, though ultimately small mobilization of Hindu nationalist activists." So really there's nothing to worry about there, but there is plenty to worry about in relation to Sikh extremism. Now the word Sikh extremism is used no less than 50 times in the report. as I said, the Prevent strategy has already defined this as a vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy. When similar protests have taken place in Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada has said that the right to demonstrate and protest is a cardinal feature of democratic life in Canada. And so one might well have taken the view that really, if people are expressing views with some nationalistic fervour, that this falls very much in line with fundamental British values. In relation to the way, again, in which Colin Bloom deals with this whole question of activism and nationalism, there's a reference to a number of other cases, such as Buddhist nationalism. Now, who's ever heard of Buddhist nationalism in this country? And the references in the report are to how Buddhist nationalism has affected Myanmar. Well, it's bound to. You've got an oppressive military regime there, and the Buddhist monks are fighting against. And a reference to Sri Lanka. Well, the two main religions are Hindus and Buddhists in Sri Lanka. And so there's reference there. What on earth does that have to do with the Buddhists in this country? So it's flawed in the way that this is undertaken. And this is before one gets to Sikh extremism and pro-Khalistani extremism, where Colin Bloom deals with that topic under that heading in the next 5 pages. And in this respect, here, again, I wish Lord Singh was here. There are 3 areas that concerns Colin Bloom. 3 areas. And let's look at them. First, it is said that there is a power struggle within some areas of British Sikh communities over who will represent them. Now, I have referred in the report towards the end to how there was that particular tension between Lord Singh and another organisation which raised a complaint against Lord Singh as not being representative. And the way that we have dealt with that is this. This is a single occurrence of a particular disagreement between an individual and an organisation. It has nothing to do with extremism or subversiveness. You are allowed to have that kind of a disagreement. And when the report was put out by the Parliamentary Commission, it found that the complaint brought by this organisation against Lord Singh was not brought in bad faith, although it was not upheld. And so in this respect, what Colin Bloom asks is this, that there's this question about who will represent them. It might have escaped Colin Bloom that Sikh Gurdwaras are autonomous institutions. All of them have their own constitutions, and they have elections that are keenly fought. And moreover, every 2 years, it's a very democratic institution. And if that's the case, there is bound, therefore, to be some degree of a power struggle, quote unquote. Why should that find a location in Colin Bloom's report under the heading of Sikh extremism or pro-Khalistani extremism? That's the question. That's the question. The second concern he raises is this: the division between some British Sikh communities, which is caused by an extremist fringe ideology. So the first point is about power struggle, the second is about the extremist fringe ideology. And he says, and I quote again, "It is important to note that the promotion of Khalistani ideals is not of itself subversive." And indeed it is not, unquote. If this is so, then it's not clear why, in the next breath, Colin Bloom goes on to say that, quote, "the subversive, aggressive and sectarian effect on wider Sikh communities should not be tolerated." Well, there is no evidence cited for what it is that has been subversive, aggressive or sectarian within the Sikh communities that is not to be tolerated. There is no citation there. Instead, we are taken in the Bloom Review to the conclusion that, quote, "propagating hate and divisions, trying to brainwash you and cause divisions and hate in India is really sad." Now, I'll repeat that again. Propagating hate and divisions, trying to brainwash you to cause divisions and hate in India is really sad. Again, that is not subversive as far as people living in this country is concerned. Thirdly, there is a even graver charge, and this charge is about fueling sectarianism and anti-Muslim sentiments. I'm not sure if there are people in this room who can identify with Sikhs fueling anti-Muslim sentiments. I well recall the Gurdwara in Southall, when it was first set up, £17 million, had a guard outside watching over it who was a Muslim. Here he says this: the third area of concern is the activities of some individuals and organizations that are demonstrably fueling sectarianism and anti-Muslim sentiments, as well as legitimizing discriminatory and misogynistic behavior. And it's all very well to say that, you know, one has to be careful about language. Look at this language: fueling sectarianism, anti-Muslim sentiments, legitimizing discriminatory, misogynistic behavior. Look at the gurdwaras that we have and the way in which women throng those places of worship. Can you ever point to any misogynistic behavior there? And Becker's belief, here the charge against Sikhs is more serious, as I say. It is that, quote, all are allowed to express their view and raise concerns of any injustice in India, but spreading hate and brainwashing Sikh youth is a matter of serious concern, unquote. Bloom concludes that although the three areas of concern are different, they're sometimes conflated and by self-appointed community leaders seeking prestige or power. And he then goes on to say that, and this is the second place where you will fall off your seat. In relation to these matters that I just raised, he goes on to say, and I quote, no question was specifically asked about these issues, unquote. Well, why ever not? If you're going to make such grandiose allegations against the faith community, why isn't a question asked? No question even asked of the 354 respondents that were interviewed. No question even to them. Why was no question asked to them in relation to this sectarianism and this anti-Muslim sentiment being propagated? Who represents the British Sikh communities? Well, again, this section, who represents the British Sikh communities, finds its place in the next 2 pages thereafter, under the heading of Sikh extremism and pro-Khalistani extremism, PKE. Bloom poses a question that, quote, for the government to engage with British Sikh communities in both a constructive and productive way, it is vital to address the issue of who is best placed to represent British Sikhs, unquote. Well, we couldn't disagree more. Why ever should it be the case that the government, in order to be constructive and productive, has to identify who is best placed? Why not be in a position to engage with all the diverse and multifarious colours of the Sikh community, the different organisations that you have, and which is precisely what the British government has been doing, which is why this report has been so unnecessary, because of the impact it has on the extremely good communal relations that the Sikhs enjoy in this country with the community at large and also with the British government. And so this question about that, I mean, where does that come from? No citation for this at all, as to, in order to be able to constructive and be productive, you need to know who you're dealing with. No evidence, no foundation put forward at all. And to say this in this way is to represent the broad range of Sikh organizations that exist in this country, we say. And he poses a question that, quote, the structure, and this is where he ends up answering his own question. He goes on, in fact, to say, and I quote, the structure of Sikh communities differs from some other religions because there is no official leader or religious authority for Sikhs in the UK. And true that is, of course it's true that there is no religious authority for Sikhs in the UK. One might also add that there is no such religious authority in India as such. The Akal Takht has a particular autonomy over the gurdwaras that fall under its purview. It has no authority in the gurdwara in Bihar or in fact in Patna side. Those are autonomous institutions. They fall outside the Punjab. And so this idea that you've got to have only a single body representing is particularly colonialist view. I think the point was made also by my colleagues. That's a colonial way of looking at this. And again, I ask, why does he need to ventilate all of this under the heading of Sikh extremism and pro-Khalistani extremism? I mean, that's the point, isn't it, really? And then we get to subversion, or pro-Khalistani subversion. And here he explains the Khalistani movement is a Sikh separatist movement seeking to establish an independent and sovereign Sikh state called Khalistan, the land of the pure, in the Punjab region of India, unquote. there are, we say, three problems with this particular analysis. The first is that while paying lip service to the fact that, quote, the promotion of pro-Khalistani ideas does not have to be subversive, unquote, he nevertheless ends up concluding without a shred of evidence that precisely because it's pro-Khalistani, it's subversive. Secondly, Bloom states that whilst these extremists reflect a tiny minority, they attract disproportionate amounts of attention and stoke divisive sentiments. Well, where is the evidence that they do attract disproportionate amount of attention and stoke divisive sentiments? When was the last time you read about this in the newspapers? Where is the evidence that it does stoke? There's plenty of evidence that when Vaisakhi takes place and all the wonderful Sikh festivals take place, they are reported across the newspapers, even in the front page of the Time. Where is the evidence that there is this disproportionate exposure of this? No source is cited of this in relation to these tiny minority activities. Thirdly, Bloom then decides to leave these shores completely and trek off to Canada. And he explains that the, quote, the subversive way of working is not unique to the UK. Canada is also experiencing a similar phenomenon as explained in the 2020 report. Now, the report my colleagues brought to my attention by the Canadian think tank MacDonald-Laurier Institute and the report by Terry Myruski's Khalistan, a project of Pakistan, overlooks the fact that Myruski's report has been heavily criticized as being, quote, politically motivated, fallacious, and far from the truth. That the reality is that there is no linkage with Pakistani funding of such pro-Khalistani sentiments that are expressed in this country. Then we go on to this subversive activity. And here I must refer to this because it was raised by Lord Singh. I'm glad to be ending with this. Insofar as there is evidence given about subversiveness, this is the evidence. There are two bits of evidence in relation to this. The first is the census controversy. He says, and I quote, the issue of secessionist political agendas within the Indian diaspora was highlighted during the controversy over calls for an additional tick box option in the 2021 census, which would allow individuals to identify as ethnically Sikh instead of or as well as religiously Sikh, unquote. Now, it might have escaped Colin Bloom, the lawyers will know this. It was a case of Mandla versus Lee that identified the Sikhs were already ethnically Sikh and not just religiously Sikh. That's a 1983 case. All right. Right. Now, it is not immediately clear why a demand for an additional tick box which helps Sikhs identify as ethnically Sikh is subversive. And even if to do so is secessionist Sikh politics. It's not clear. And Bloom goes on to say, quote, some respondents to this review claim that the tick box controversy bears all the traits of an extremist interpretation of pro-Khalistan ideology, unquote. Because those in the opposing camp maintain that the ancient Sikh teachings of oneness, unquote, are such that they, quote, contain no endorsement of an exclusive ethno-religious state called Khalistan. I'm sure we could all have a 3-hour discussion about this without any one of us being tainted with the label of being subversive as to whether ancient Sikh teachings of oneness do require us to go one way or whether it's the case that we really ought, we've matured to the extent as a community that we ought to have our own ethnic tick box. We can have a very, very vibrant discussion about that, I've no doubt. But what does that have to do with subversive activity? And as I say, I kid you not, that is what is got under the heading of subversive activity. All right? And he then goes on to say, quote, for the avoidance of doubt, it is no longer an offence under UK law to advocate for the creation of a new state or for changes in an existing state, which may have been as an offence against the government or the crown in the historic past. Because in the UK, people are free to campaign with all the nationalistic fervour they want. All the nationalistic fervour they want? Well, if that's the case, how is this subversive? He's answered his own question. If there is fervour on the side of having an ethnic tick box, this is not subversive. I will recall, and many of you will be able to recall, that time when there was this agitation going on, How many of us thought this to be subversive? The second example he gives is that of COVID-19. And here, quote, another example, unquote, is that, quote, during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, unquote, there, quote, was a press release criticizing government's guidance for places of worship as offensive, unquote. And in the footnote, Colin Bloom says that this press release is no longer available. But he adds that the Times of India reported it on 16th June 2020. Well, we looked up the Times of India, and it is reported there that within 48 hours of the setting up of the government's Places of Worship Task Force, dozens of gurdwaras had rejected it in June 2020, and they'd done so on strictly religious grounds. Now, here is what the Times of India points out. It says three things. Firstly, that the use of alcohol-based hand sanitizers was unacceptable for a religion where alcohol was banned. What do you expect some 8-year-old Buddhi coming to the Gurdwara to say, I'm not going to touch that stuff. It's not in my home and I'm not using it here. How is this subversive? How is this remotely subversive? Secondly, shutting down of Gurdwaras for normal services was unacceptable for a religion where the places of worship are open all the time for people that want to attend to it. Thirdly, the restriction of worship at the Gurdwara of the over 70s on grounds of their acute vulnerability was unacceptable for a generation for whom the Gurdwara is the centerpiece of their social existence. All right? And what Bloom says is this. I wish Lord Singh was here to hear this. This reviewer was disappointed to witness the uncooperative and disruptive behavior of some Sikh groups intent on sowing division. Does anyone here recall the sowing of division between those Gurdwaras that wanted to carry on with their courage as normal and those that said, no, we're going to abide by the task force requirement? Sowing of division and asserting their influence. Were there people going around saying to others, no, look, you shouldn't really open your Gurdwara, close your Gurdwara at all. You should close it, and you should use the alcohol-based hand sanitizers. Groups intent on sowing division and asserting their influence, particularly towards the efforts of other faith representatives who were stepping up to the plate in time of great national need. No citation is given for this, and I will end with this as someone who was brought up in the North and still has great pride for it. Bloom would have done rather well to move away from chapter 6 and go to an earlier chapter, chapter 2, because there he says this, quote, the Guru Nanak Gurdwara in Wolverhampton hosted COVID-19 testing pilot in November 2020, which helped NHS England identify undiagnosed cases and protect those most at risk from the virus. This is our report, and we commend it to Sikhs in the House.
Thank you very much. The panel have dealt with their review and findings in both a meticulous and thorough way, with countless hours dedicated to reviewing the evidence and drafting their findings. Was there any evidence of extremist behaviour within the definition of prevent?
No.
Was there any evidence of terrorist activity within accordance with the law of England and Wales?
No.
Thank you very much. I know we've had limited time to go through all the evidence, and I know that you have relied upon written and oral evidence which is quoted within your judgment, which will be available on the website of Sikhs in Law for those to download. We are grateful as the Council of Sikhs in Law for the time and efforts you have put in preparation and delivery of this judgment. If I can invite Professor Juss on behalf of the Council. Dr. Gurnath Singh. Bole so nihal. Sat Sri Akal. Dr. Dalbir Gill.
Bole Sonehal.
And we offer this seva to the Sikh community on behalf of Sikhs in law.
On behalf of the UK Sikh community, we thank the Select Committee for their seva in bringing their findings to the community. We now request, on behalf of the community, that the parliamentarians take this report forward and deal with it as such. Thank you.
The highest office of the state. In order this process due out to all relevant contexts. Sorry, Chair, I should add, it seems that it has already been circulated quite widely within the local authorities, and there are issues and concerns already arising. So it is important that this response also follows suit.
Thank you very much.
And I'm excited that Colin Bloom has specifically asked that the APPG for Sikhs should respond to his report. That includes you.
I take this opportunity to raise that the critique within the report labelled a power struggle and infighting, if anything, this experience has highlighted the complete opposite within our community. Every single jatabandi and organisation has come forward and contributed in some way to our review, whether that be by written or oral evidence. We called upon the community with a united voice, and a united voice came forward in high spirits. The embodiment of the basic tenets of our faith of truth, justice and equality. I thank Lord Sahota for hosting us today. I know he has gone to great lengths to make sure this event took place. I take this opportunity to thank the sterling review commended to us by the panel, Professor Chas, Professor Dr. Dalvir Girl and Dr. Gurnam Singh and our own Ajat Singh Bungle. I thank the association who deputised on behalf of the council today, Mr. Shani Singh Gupta, Rupinder Mataru, Pavandeep Kaur Dhillon and Lavjot Singh Khalsa, as well as Gurbani Kaur and Rajpat Singh today, doing their part in being your voice, in being present and sharing in the concern of the Sikh community. We thank all the parliamentarians that have attended today as well. That concludes our meeting.
Can
I just say a few words? Far too often when things like this happen, we don't organise and we don't come together and we don't, absolutely evidence-based and have a very clear analysis. So what you have done today is really setting the benchmark very high in terms of how we must work together going forward and how we must evidence-based and really challenge government in terms of what it is putting forward. I really want to thank you. I mean, I know Bloom is asking for my view, of course, in respect, but what I should say, I have contacted Baroness Scott because what you don't know is at the time of this meeting, there is a Sikh roundtable being held, which is being chaired by Baroness Scott, and nobody knows who she has invited from the Sikh community to talk about Bloom Review. And I asked that Damanjit Singh and I and other lords be represented at the meeting, and what she said was that we were free to submit a written submission, which obviously I have done, but that is not the point. The point is I want to meet with her and absolutely ask for transparency, because as you made the point, government must consult with the broad Sikh community. No one person represents us, but actually our group guards represent our Sangh, and they are integral to this conversation. And far too often, I have to challenge government in terms of who they decide to pick and choose to come to those meetings. And we know it's lots of people that actually support their view and won't ever challenge them. That is not representation for us, and we have such diverse voices in our community that they all need a representation. So my humble benefit to you all is, as the chair of the APPG, I'm really wanting to work with everybody. And far too often people say we only work with one organisation. Absolutely not true. Every single event that we hold in Parliament, I have never sought to invite people. We have an open Eventbrite. We allow new people to come to Parliament because this is your Parliament. You should be able to access it. And it's not down to me to pick and choose who I invite. And actually, we've started to see 50% women attending to our events, which is phenomenal. And so I just want to, honestly, the work that you've done, I applaud. I will take and absolutely share across party. I know Martin is here. from the SNP will make sure that all the Conservatives, including Labour at the highest levels, has access to this report and can consider it. Each department is really important for the Home Office, the Foreign Office, and of course MHCLG. But I just want to say to all of you, thank you so much. This means a lot. This really makes our job here as parliamentarians a lot more easier, because without this evidence base, it is really, really difficult to challenge and advocate on behalf of our community. So once again,
If I could just make one very brief comment, because Lord Singh raised the issue about thuggish behaviour, and we did consider the evidence on thuggish behaviour, but our response was the specific allegations on extremism and extremist violence, and we didn't find any evidence for that. That's not to say that, like all communities, we as a community have the problem of thuggish behaviour, and our position was that if there is thuggish behaviour, the criminal law is there, and it should be used to deal with that, not conflating the criminal law with these very dangerous and very specific construction of a community, which itself is celebrated as one of the most law communities in this country. So that was the key distinction. So it's, you know, if Lord Singh has a point about thuggish behaviour, it's just a conflation with violent extremism. There was no evidence for it. That was the key point there.
Can I just come back on that? One thing I did notice though is I have, for the first time, it was the Blue Review that talked about pro-Khalistan extremism. This label, I'm very unclear as to where it's come from, including Sikh extremism. Right-wing extremism isn't deemed as Christian extremism. We really got to come away of using religious terms to define extremism and terrorism. We know it exists in every community. Nobody in this room is saying that it doesn't exist in every community. Of course we do, but we've got to use the evidence base. I have to say, Lord Singh can't personalise his own views or have a judgment without evidence and come here and think it's absolutely okay to share that. This is about how government has got about faith, and Blue went out of his terms of reference. And that is in fact, and I tabled a number of questions. One of them was, did taxpayers' money pay for this report? I mean, the government hasn't answered that question. This is half the problem. But I think what we do need to think about as a community going forward is these terms that are being used to label us. How do we counter that, and how do we write to government to say we do not want to be referred to? Because Martin is clear, the right to self-determination is already protected in international law, regardless of what your views are. Of course, if there are extreme elements, the government has the opportunity to arrest, deal with those people through prevent strategy and other means, through counter-terror, right? So none of us are saying that shouldn't happen. We absolutely want the law of the land to be upheld, but it is terms like this that are used to describe what is a legitimate right. Is something we've got to think about. How do we, going forward, work together collectively to counter some of this narrative as well?
Mr. Doherty.
Well, thank you first of all for the invite and to offer my support to the work that the Treat does with the All Party Group to work on this issue. But as a Scottish secessionist, as someone who is ethnically Irish and a Roman Catholic, I found Colin Bloom's report very, very odd indeed. And I take note of some of the terminology that was highlighted around things like apostate and heretic. Now, the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity haven't used that since the death of Pope Pius XII, and that was around about 1962, possibly 52. So I have to say, and I'm not the only scholar around the table, and I know that the Scottish legal profession is aptly represented today. We are independent in law, we have our own parliament, and this report has no purview in Scotland. This has no impact in Scotland on how we see religion as a matter of personal expression and not to be conflated with other issues, whether it be the right to national self-determination, which is an essential element of the UN Declaration. I have to say, in reading the report also, I have no idea what fundamental British values are. What does that actually mean? I find that all very, very, very odd. Maybe also, I know because we're very short for time, because Treat and I will probably need to head back for PMQs. Also, in terms of the Gurdwaras, during the pandemic, the Gurdwaras in Scotland were at the forefront of leading, assisting the NHS in the campaign during the COVID pandemic to reach out beyond the Sikh community into houses across the length and breadth of Scotland, whether it be in the west of Scotland, where in Edinburgh, Glasgow, up in Aberdeen, even in some of the islands as well, reaching out, making sure that people had access to food, people who were isolated, to friendship, and the work that the Gurdwaras have done in Scotland is to be commended during the pandemic. Again, I just go back to that point. The report, and I think it was highlighted again, that this is heavily weighted by someone who has clearly a relationship with the government. And if that were maybe laid out in the report, that might give more kind of independence to them in terms of the Bloom report, but they don't lay that out about their relationship to the government. And I need to be very candid here. There is no mention of extremist Christian extremism in this country. I don't know how many of you walk past a Roman Catholic church at certain times in July in the north of England and in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Maybe remind Mr. Bloom about that. Because there is extremism at the heart of the unwritten constitution of this very state. So for Mr. Bloom to completely forget about, and some people use the word sectarian, I call it good old-fashioned word in Scotland, bigotry. And it's based on fear and intolerance. And I think if the all-party group parliamentary group can work together to make sure that we spearhead, specifically I think for issues here for English colleagues, about breaking down bigotry and building those interfaith links. And I say that not as someone, I think the report says, true believers. Well, I'm a doubting Thomas as a Christian. And I'd rather be a doubting Thomas than one of these firebrands, because I think doubts always have to be answered. And that's a good thing in a democracy. Commend the report from the Sikh Council of Sikhs in Law, and I look forward to working with you as we go ahead in the remainder of this Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tissy.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I would like to thank you yourself, the Council for Sikhs in Law, and also the Lord Sahib for hosting today's very much needed event. This is an issue that many of my South constituents have got in touch with me. I know I've had discussions with Lord Sahib on this, as well as your very own Japji Pungal, and there are a cross-section of community organisations, Jathebandiyan, Gurdwaras, who I have been conversing with, our Bhai Singh ji and Gurnam Singh ji and others, and I think this is something that has been debated within the community. And some of us have been very concerned about the inconsistencies and anomalies within the report. The use of words such as extremism for particular communities, while for others it is referred to as nationalism, or others it may be referred to as missionary activity, and others it could be termed as activism. Or look, if there is to be such usage of language, it must be consistent for all communities. And I think with regards to the British Sikh community, we are dealing with one of the most law-abiding, one of the most prosperous, one of the most hard-working communities in the country, which has made an incredible contribution to the community, not just during the COVID pandemic, not just because of the amazing work that the Gurdwaras do in terms of the seva that they are involved in, but if we look at the latest census figures, the Sikh community has the highest level of home ownership of any community in the country. It has the second highest level of graduates of any community within Britain. I don't think we are dealing with a big problem with regards to Sikh extremism in the country, and I think for somebody to paint the community in that manner is seen for what it is, and that this is an attempt to slur the community, and that is not something that is acceptable to many of us. And I know, having conversed with yourselves, including journalists, some of the individuals who I have, and that it has been, by the way, a cross-section of the community, and almost everybody is of the same opinion. And we all know, being in a Sikh community, it's very hard to get the funds together, to get the community agreed on a particular issue. So I have actually been staggered by the unanimous approach and the unanimous thinking on this particular matter, and that is why I think it did fall upon an organisation such as the Council for Sikhs and Law. I was very happy, by the way, very pleased to attend your installation and your inauguration ceremony within the Supreme Court, and I think you will end up, through this report as well, being a credit not just to your good selves but to the wider community, because this is exactly the sort of evidence that us parliamentarians need. I will stand up and I will speak up for what I believe is right, based on my own opinion. But it is wonderful when you can draw upon facts and figures from elsewhere, especially in the gurdwaras and the jathebandis and organisations such as yourself. This is a matter, by the way, that I have raised. In fact, yesterday we were discussing this very matter with the Shadow Minister for Faith, Sarah Owen. She was actually here in this meeting earlier because I did discuss with her and she said definitely she will be here. So she was here listening to your proceedings earlier today. As the Labour Party's Sikh faith champion, this is whether it's other Sikh related issues, we raise those with Keir Starmer and with the Labour leadership to make sure that the community is not maligned, the community is held in high regard, and that Sikh community issues are actually brought to the fore for which, touchwood, very soon will be a Labour government. Don't worry, it's not a political forum, I know that. But regardless of which government comes in, our job as elected parliamentarians, I know we've got Preet and myself and also our job is to make sure that the party leadership within our respective parties actually gets where the community stands and what steps must be taken. So very well done, and yeah, I look forward to reading your report in full when I get the time later on.
Just three very quick points in relation to what's been said. Firstly, we did not get to the evidence, but Professor Meena Danda makes a point that in relation to how Hindu community and others are referred to as Hindu nationalism, but Sikhs as extremism, this is a deliberate attempt in the report to provide a distraction to that which they ought to be focusing on in the area of trade relations with India. That's a point that she's made. It's in the report. The second point is this, that we did not get to the evidence, but one of the persons that came in July to speak with us was a lady who had set up the first Gurmat camp in this country. And she was asked specifically, do you in the Gurmat camp teach young children about 1984? She said, yes. Are you told about the sacrifices? Yes. Do you teach the children to hate? No, never. So this idea that, you know, it's subversive, or there's hatred or anti-Muslim sentiment and so on, is completely baseless. And the third very esoteric, easy point that Martin made is this. Professor Preetam Singh from Oxford, whose evidence is also included, said that the quest for a Khalistani separate state is no different for the Scottish National Party having independence for itself.
Yeah, I mean, I just come, you know, the issue of national self-determination for any country is up to them. And as a civic nationalist who comes from a country, not a province, but a country, which was founded in the year 845, just putting that out there, you know, I find some of the argument and the crossover in the Bloom report is deeply, deeply concerning. And I think it goes to the heart of some of the debates and some of the leadership that have been shown at the top of the UK government at the moment. It is very, very concerning. That's why I made the point that there is nothing about right-wing Christian fundamentalism, which is an essential part, in some senses, of the very state. And I'm not going to be detrimental to the members of the upper house, but I was involved in a debate only last week in Westminster Hall around the roles of the bishops of the Church of England in the upper house. Now, nothing against them personally, I don't support an unelected chamber, but you don't see the moderator of the General Assembly, you don't see any of the Roman Catholic cardinals, you don't see anyone specifically representing, in a theological sense, the Sikh community. So there are big challenges around how the British state sees religion in a formal sense. And I think your report will probably highlight how that has an impact on the Sikh community. And just briefly on the trade agreement, totally agree with you. The trade agreement between the UK and India is about the money. And I could go into that in greater detail when it be concerning a certain constituent of mine, but I won't at this very time.
Thank you, Lord Sahib.
Okay, thanks everyone, thanks for the report. I look forward to reading your report. I only read Bloom's report for the last couple of months, so thanks very much for that. Just to answer Baron Scott, actually being a new, I walked into last week into the government office. I said, oh, by the way, there is a briefing next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. I'd like to be there. And he said, we'll look into it. And they never got back to me. The information I got was from Lord Singh. He said, are you invited to that briefing? I said, no. I said, that's all right. They've probably forgotten about me because I'm a new. and so they haven't got back to me. Anyway, thanks very much for everybody, and thanks for coming in. And then when I read the Bloom report, actually, I first liked the first paragraph, or first when he praises the Sikh community, starts off on it, this and that. That's the way
Accept the title.
I like this one here. And what happened was that we had a legal migration bill going through for the last couple of weeks, and my contribution was that I supported human rights and all this, but there is a little in one of them, and I started off by saying it's the thing is with the House of Lords or House of Commons, you can always go back and see yourself, unlike the councils or the other thing. In a council you say anything and you can always deny it, but in the House of Lords it's always there. So they told me to be careful. So you can go back and have a look at it, and I said, one of the most successful, lowest, the highest house ownership, lowest this. I said, I agree with the characterization of the Sikh community. And then I left it. So if anybody wants to have a look at it, they can. It's only about 3-minute speech or something. I didn't want to go into the legalities of the immigration bill or something, but that was the point I wanted to make. Thank you very much for everyone report and everyone, all those who came in, and thanks very much for everything. And of course, if there is any issue, I will be coming to the legal side, I always say, because I'm not a legal mind. I'm just a local authority politician for the last 20 odd years and so on. So there will be some times when I will be coming for my advice as well. Thank you for that.
If I can finally end on this thought, that this document, if left unchallenged, would have had catastrophic effects on the Sikh community, particularly advising policy makers. So it's essential that anyone that tries to attack the Sikh community in this way, as Bloom has done, thinks twice and they come prepared. Thank you very much.
ਸਤਿ ਸੰਗ ਜੀ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸਤਿ ਸੰਗ ਜੀ, ਮਾਂ ਦੀ ਅਪਾਰ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮੈਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਵੀਰਾਂ ਭੈਣਾਂ ਦਾ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਾਂ ਦੀ ਅਪਾਰ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿੱਧੀ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕਰਦੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਕੋਲਿਨ ਬਲੂਮ ਦੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ। ਤੇ ਇਹ ਹੋਇਆ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੜ੍ਹੇ ਲਿਖੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਸਾਂਭਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕਿ ਪੰਥ ਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਵਾਂ। ਜਦੋਂ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਪੀੜ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਪੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਦੇ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਨ ਰਿਪੋਰਟਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੱਧੀਆਂ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕਰਨ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ। ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਪੂਰੀ ਉਮੀਦ ਆ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕਰੂਗੀ ਅਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਹੱਲਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਊਗੀ ਅਤੇ ਜਿੱਤ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੋਊਗੀ। ਬਿਕਾਜ਼ ਬੜੀ ਭੈੜੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਇਹਨੇ ਇਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੋਲਿਨ ਬਲੂਮ ਦੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਅਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕਰਨਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਸੀਗਾ। ਅਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਬਲਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਣਾ ਦਾ ਫਰੋਮ ਦ ਸਿੱਖਸ ਲੋ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀ ਤੋਂ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਉਪਰਾਲਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਅਤੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿਟਨੈਸ ਸਟੇਟਮੈਂਟ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਐਵੀਡੈਂਸ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਬੜੇ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ। ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਸਿਰਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ। ਅਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਐਸਾ ਅਰਦਾਸ ਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ 'ਚ ਰਹਿਣ, ਇੱਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਪੰਥ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਿਣ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦੀ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਤੇ ਤੇ ਕਿਤੇ ਤਰੱਕੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਏ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਬੜੀ ਇੱਕ ਅਹਿਮ ਦਿਨ ਹੈ ਜੀ ਅੱਜ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦਾ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਪਬਲਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤਾ, ਜੋ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫਾਈਂਡਿੰਗਸ ਮਿਲੇ ਆ, ਜਿਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਇਹ ਬੜੀ ਅਨਫੇਅਰਲੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਟਾਰਗੇਟ ਕਰਦਾ ਕਿ 12 ਪੇਜ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਲਿਖ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਤਾਂ ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੀਮਿਸਟ ਆ, ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕੀਤੇ ਜੀ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਗੁਰਮਤ ਕੈਂਪਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਫ਼ਰਤ ਫੈਲਾਈ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਆਲਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਇਹ ਰੌਲਾ ਪਾਉਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਕੌਮ ਆ ਜੀ, ਇਹ ਆਬਜੈਕਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤੀਆਂ ਜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਤਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਬੁਰਾਈਆਂ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ, ਇਹ ਕੋਈ ਫੇਅਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਅਤੇ ਆਲਸੋ ਐਡੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਕੋਲਿਨ ਬਲੂਮ ਨੇ ਲਿਖੀ ਆ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ 'ਤੇ 12 ਪੇਜ ਲਿਖੇ ਜੀ, ਅਤੇ ਬਾਕੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਡੇਢ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਿਖ ਹੋਇਆ, ਅਤੇ ਉਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਗਨੋਰ ਕੀਤਾ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਐਕਟੀਵਿਟੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਸੱਦਿਆ, ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਐਕਟੀਵਿਟੀਆਂ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਐਕਟੀਵਿਟੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੇਲ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਖਾਣੀਆਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੀਮਿਜ਼ਮ ਕਹਿ ਕੇ ਕੀਤਾ। ਇਸ ਲਈ ਆਪਾਂ ਬੜੇ ਸ਼ੁਕਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰ ਹਾਂ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਗੁਰਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ, ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਜਸ ਦਾ, ਦਲਵੀਰ ਕੌਰ ਗਿੱਲ ਦਾ ਤੇ ਆਲਸੋ ਬਲਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਆਪਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈਗਾ। MP ਆਇਆ ਸੀ ਅੱਜ, ਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਗਿੱਲ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ ਤਨਮਨਜੀਤ, ਤੇ ਸੀ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ ਸਕਾਟਲੈਂਡ ਤੋਂ ਮਾਰਟਨ ਡੋਹਟੀ ਆਇਆ ਸੀਗੇ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਲੋਡ ਸੋਟ ਓਬਵੀਅਸਲੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਾਲੇ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਲੰਬੜਦਾਰ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਬਾਅਦ 'ਚ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜੀ, ਆਪਾਂ ਮਨਕਮਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਹਵਾਲੇ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾਵੇ, ਇਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟਰੀ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਦੀ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਬੈਠੇ ਤੇ ਆਲਸੋ ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਜੋ ਹੈਗੀ ਕੋਲਿਨ ਬਲੂਮ ਦੀ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਵਿਦਡਰਾਅ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਵੇ। ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਜੋ ਦਿਹਾੜੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਸ਼ੁਕਰਗੁਜ਼ਾਰ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ ਲੋਰਡ ਸੋਹਤਾ ਜੀ ਦਾ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਟਾਈਮ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਇੰਨੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਹਾਊਸ ਆਫ ਲੋਰਡ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਉਣ ਦਾ ਮੌਕਾ ਮਿਲਿਆ। ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ, ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਊਥ ਹਾਲ ਦੇ ਸਟਰੀਟਾਂ 'ਚ ਗਰਾਉਣ ਅਪ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ, ਸਮੈਦਿਕ ਦੀ ਸਟਰੀਟਾਂ 'ਚ ਗਰਾਉਣ ਅਪ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ, ਉੱਥੇ ਰਹਿਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਣੇ ਸੀ ਹਾਊਸ ਆਫ ਲੋਰਡ ਦੇ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਸਾਦਾ ਜੀ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦਾ, ਤਾਂ ਲੋਰਡ ਸੋਹਤਾ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਆਜੋ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੋਸਟ ਕਰਦਾ। ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਇਹ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਇਹ ਪੰਥ ਲਈ ਉਠਾਇਆ ਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਆ ਜੀ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਬੜੀ ਧੱਕਾ ਹੀ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਅਤੇ ਧੱਕਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਜੇ ਸਹਿ ਲਾਂਗੇ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ, ਇਹ ਗਾਹਾਂ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਪਹੁੰਚੀ, ਕਿੰਨੇ ਧੱਕੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਹੋਗੇ। ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਸਿਖਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੀ ਹਿਫਾਜ਼ਤ ਕਰੋ, ਕੋਈ ਧੱਕਾ ਨਾ ਕਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਉਮਰ ਹੀ ਸਿਖਾਉਂਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ। ਅਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੰਥ ਜੋ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਆਪਾਂ ਵੀ ਗੁਰੂਆਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਹੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਧੱਕਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਸਹੀਏ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਕੋਈ ਕਰੇ, ਕੋਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਲਿਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਜੀ ਰਿਸਰਚ ਕਰਕੇ ਫੇਰ ਲਿਖੇ, ਸਾਰੇ ਪ੍ਰੂਫ ਰੱਖੇ ਮੋਹਰੇ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵਕੀਲ ਵਕਾਲਤ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਕੋਰਟ 'ਚ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਕਵੇ ਜੀ ਆਹ ਨੁਕਸ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ 'ਚ, ਆਹ ਨੁਕਸ ਆ, ਬਿਨਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਗੱਲ ਤੋਂ, ਬਿਨਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਐਵੀਡੈਂਸ ਤੋਂ, ਬਿਨਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੀ ਸਿਰਫ 300 ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਕੇ 20,000 ਲੋਕਾਂ 'ਚੋਂ ਸਿਰਫ 300 ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ 12 ਪੇਜ ਲਿਖਣੇ ਆ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ, ਅਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ 50% 10,000 ਕ੍ਰਿਸਚੀਅਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਿਰਫ 2 ਪੇਜ ਲਿਖਣੇ ਆ। ਇਹ ਕੋਈ ਫੇਅਰ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕੋਈ ਸਾਰੇ ਮੰਨੂਗੇ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਇਹ ਕੋਈ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਫੇਅਰ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਤਾਂ ਇਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਜੀ। ਆਪਾਂ ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਾਥ ਤਾਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ, ਆਪਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਲਾ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਗਦੇ, ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹੀ ਮੰਗਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਥ ਦਿਓ, ਅਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵੀ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਪੜ੍ਹੇ ਲਿਖੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜੋ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਲੋਕ ਹੈ ਜੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਆ, ਟੀਚਰ ਆ, ਡਾਕਟਰ ਆ, ਇਹ ਜੋ ਯੁੱਧ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਜਾਂ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ, ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਯੁੱਧ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ, ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਆ ਸਕਦਾ ਜੀ, ਇਹ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦੀ ਪੜ੍ਹੀ ਲਿਖੀ ਦੀ ਏਜ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ, ਡਿਜੀਟਲ ਏਜ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਆ। ਹਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜੋ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਮੋਰੇ, ਉਹਦਾ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ, ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਬੜਾ ਥੈਂਕਫੁਲ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਆਏ ਆ। ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਆਪਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਵੀ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਆਪਾਂ TV ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵੀ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਕੈਮ ਨਾਲ, ਅਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇਨ ਡੀਟੇਲ ਦੱਸਾਂਗੇ ਜੀ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਆ ਕੀ ਨਹੀਂ। ਮੈਂ ਇਹੀ ਕਹਾਂਗੀ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ 'ਚ ਰੱਖੇ, ਤਾਂ ਅਤਿਆਚਾਰ ਔਰ ਧੱਕੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਚਾਵੇ, ਅਤੇ ਆਲਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਣ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਣਾ, ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੈਨਾ ਬਣੀ। ਇਹੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸੀਪਲਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਜੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਜੋਗਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬੋਲੋ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਸਿੱਖਸ ਐਂਡ ਲਾਅ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅੱਜ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਕੋਲਿਨ ਬਲੂਮ ਦੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਮੁਕਾਬਲੇ 'ਤੇ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਜਸ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਅਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਬਲਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੁਣੀ, ਡਾਕਟਰ ਗੁਰਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੁਣੀ, ਹੋਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਟੀਮ, ਮੈਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਦਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਬੂਤਾਂ ਸਮੇਤ ਉਹਦਾ ਜਵਾਬ ਦਿੱਤਾ। ਪਰ ਮੇਰੀ ਇੱਕ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੋਈ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ, ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਜਵਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਆਪਾਂ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੀਏ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਮਸਲੇ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਨਜਿੱਠਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੀਏ। ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਛਪ ਜਾਂਦੀ, ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਜਵਾਬ ਬੀਤੇ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਚ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਬਜਾਏ ਉਦੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਕੀਏ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾ ਆਉਣਾ ਪਵੇ। ਸੋ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਜਾਣੇ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਏ, ਸਿੱਖਸ ਐਂਡ ਲਾਅ, ਜਿੰਨੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਟੀਮ, ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੁਚੱਜੇ ਢੰਗ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਜੀ। ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਜੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਇਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੂੰਗਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਜਨਮ ਪੇਸ਼ਾ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਤਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜਰਾਇਮ ਪੇਸ਼ਾ ਲੇਬਲ ਲਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਪਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਮੰਗਦਾ। ਇਹ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਖਿਲਾਫ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਸਗੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਸ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੱਕ 'ਚ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਹਰੇਕ ਦੇਸ਼ ਨੂੰ, ਹਰੇਕ ਮਨੁੱਖ ਨੂੰ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਹਿਊਮਨ ਰਾਈਟਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਹੱਕ ਆ ਵੀ ਹਰੇਕ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਹੋਂਦ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਤੀਕ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੱਕ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੇਟਡ ਦੇ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਵੀ ਕਿਸੇ 'ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੋਸ਼ ਨਾ ਲਾਵੋ, ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਆ। ਇੱਕ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਕਹੂੰਗਾ, ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਇਹ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਆ ਵੀ ਹਰੇਕ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨੈਲਿਟੀ ਜਾਂ ਸਗਰੀ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ। ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਨਸਰ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਤਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਲੈਣੀ ਪਊਗੀ, ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ, ਸਾਡੇ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੈਟਿਕ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਲੜੀਏ, ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ 'ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਨਾ ਕਰੀਏ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਡਿਵੀਜ਼ਨ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ। ਫਿਰ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਉਹ ਡਿਵੀਜ਼ਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਐਕਸਪਲੋਇਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ 'ਤੇ ਉਹ ਵੜਦੀਆਂ ਹਨ। ਸੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਈਏ, ਸਾਡੀ ਡਾਈਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਈਏ, ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋਰ ਤਕੜੇ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਲਾਸਟ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਇਹ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਹੱਕ ਹੋਵੋ ਜਾਂ ਨਾ ਹੱਕ ਹੋਵੋ, ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਆ, ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਮੰਨਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੇ ਕੌਮ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਦੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕੌਮ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰੀਏ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੌਮ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਕੌਮ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲੈਵਲ 'ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਵਾਬ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਹੋਂਦ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਤੀਕ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹ 'ਚੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਸਬਕ ਸਿੱਖਣਾ। ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਇੰਟਲੈਕਚੁਅਲਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਹਰੇਕ ਪੱਖ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਹੁਣ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੈਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੋਂ ਸੇਵਾ ਲਵੋ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਟਰਕਚਰਸ ਬਣਾਵੋ। ਅਸੀਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਜਿੰਦੀ ਜਾਗਦੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸਿਸ ਆਪਾਂ ਵਰਤੀਏ। ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖੜ੍ਹੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਖਾਲਸੇ ਸੇਵਾ ਸੀ, ਤਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਕ ਦਿਨ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਇਹ 'ਚੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਲਾਰਡ ਸਹੋਤਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਮੈਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਦਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਅਜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ 6 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਹੋਏ ਇਸ ਹਾਊਸ ਆਫ ਲਾਰਡਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਇਆ ਨੂੰ, ਔਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ 6 ਮਹੀਨਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਅੱਜ ਕੈਂਪ ਕਰਤੀ ਆ। ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਆਪ ਕਹਿ ਦੇਣਗੇ ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸਾਧ ਸੰਗਤ ਜੀ, ਮੈਂ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਗੁਰਨਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਣਾ ਕਿ 6-7 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਹੋਇਆ ਆਇਆ ਨੂੰ, ਅਤੇ ਹਾਲੇ ਤੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਹਾਲੇ ਫਾਈਂਡਿੰਗ ਮਾਈ ਵੇ ਅਰਾਊਂਡ, ਅਤੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬੜਾ ਮਾਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਕੋਈ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਸਕਾਂ, ਅਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਗਾਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਕੋਈ ਔਂਕੜਾ ਹੋਣ, ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਆ ਪਵੇ, ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੈਗਾ ਹਾਂ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਮੈਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਲੇਬਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦਾ ਰੈਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵ ਹੈਗਾ, ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਵੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਹਾਂ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਲੇਬਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਮੁੱਖ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦਾ, ਅਤੇ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੋਵੇ, ਮੇਰੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੋਇਲਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਵਫਾਦਾਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਮੇਰਾ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਪਾਸਪੋਰਟ ਕੈਰੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਆ, ਪਰ ਮੇਰੀ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਦੇ ਜੋ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਲੋਇਲਟੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ। ਪਰ ਮੈਂ ਧਰਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ 'ਚ ਹੈਗਾ, ਮੈਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਨੂੰ ਬਿਲੋਂਗ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਉੱਧਰ ਲੋਇਲਟੀ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਿਤੇ ਲੋੜ ਪਵੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ UK ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਇੱਥੇ ਮੈਂ ਸਦਾ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੈਗਾ, ਅਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਪ੍ਰਵਾਨ ਕਰਨੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਸਿਰਫ ਆਪਣੇ ਗੁਰਨਾਮ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਮੈਂ ਸੋਚਿਆ। ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ 'ਚ ਤੁਕ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੀ ਕਿ ਜੈਸਾ ਜਗ ਮੇਂ ਰਹੀਏ, ਕਿਛ ਸੁਣੀਏ ਕਿਛ ਕਹੀਏ, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਔਰ ਜੋ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਇਹ ਸਮਾਂ ਜੋਸ਼ ਦਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਹੋਸ਼ ਦਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੈ। ਇਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਸ਼ੱਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ ਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰਤ ਪੜੇਗੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਲੜਨ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੋਵਾਂਗੇ, ਅਸੀਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਲੜਨ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ। ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਾਮਯਾਬੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਇਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ, ਉਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਹੋਸ਼ ਤੋਂ ਕੰਮ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ। ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਦਰਖਾਸਤ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ ਕਿ ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ, ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਬੜੇ ਕਰੇਜਸ ਦਿਲ ਵਾਲੇ ਲੋਕ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮੋਹਰੇ ਆਉਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ। ਮੋਹਰੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਅਗਰ ਸਾਡੇ 'ਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਹਮਲਾ ਕਰੇ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੀ ਆਪ ਹਿਫਾਜ਼ਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ। ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ। ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ।
ਬਲਦੇਵ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। I just want to make this humble beinti to the Sadh Sangat listening, that being that our forefathers have been representing us and have done the seva and brought us this far. It is now our job to step up and let them retire, but also take on that workload representing the community in a professional way, engaging with all sorts of groups, including the government, in the way that we hope that we've shown today. So just saying that, I do. Bhulla chok the kema. Waheguru ji ka khalsa, Waheguru ji ki fateh.
वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह जो सारा ने किया है वो बहुत ही शलाघायोग है ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕੋ ਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿਰਸੇ ਤੋਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਤੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਰਿਐਕਟਿਵ ਨਹੀਂ ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਐਕਟਿਵ ਹਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਐਕਟਿਵ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਵਿਜ਼ਨਰੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਜਿੱਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੱਥ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਹਨ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੇਰੀ ਇਹੋ ਇੱਕ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾਯੋਗ ਕੰਮ ਹੈ ਸੋ ਲੈਟਸ ਬੀ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਐਂਡ ਪ੍ਰੋਐਕਟਿਵ ਵਿਜ਼ਨਰੀ ਸੋ ਦੈਟ ਵੀ ਮੂਵ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਦਿਨ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਿਕ ਦਿਨ ਹੈ ਆਪਣੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਲਾਰਡ ਸਹੋਤਾ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਇਸ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਤੌਰ ਲਾਰਡ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਨਿਭਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਸਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਔਰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਇਹ ਨਿਭਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਤੇ ਲੇਬਰ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਤੇ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਵੀ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੇ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਇੱਥੇ ਤਾਂ 150-200 ਸਾਲ ਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਵੈਸੇ ਪਰ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਅੱਧੀ ਸਦੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੰਡਲਾ ਕੇਸ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹੁਣ ਤਾਈਂ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਏ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਲੂਮ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਲਿਖਤੀ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਈ ਸੀ ਇਸ ਕਿਸਮ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਹੈ ਆਪਣੇ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵਾਰ ਆਇਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਸਾਰੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨਦਾਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਵਿਦਵਾਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਸਟ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਨੇ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨਸ ਨੇ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਇਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਮੈਂਟਸ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਗਾਂਹ ਤੋਰਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਆ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਸੇ ਰਾਹ ਤੇ ਤੁਰ ਕੇ ਗਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਵੇ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਆਵੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਨਵੀਆਂ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਦੀਆਂ ਐਕੈਡੈਮਿਕ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਦੇ ਆ ਕਾਨੂੰਨਦਾਨ ਲਾਇਰਸ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਐਕਟਿਵਿਸਟ ਤੇ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਸਾਰੇ ਰਲ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨ ਤੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਭਾਈਚਾਰਾ ਬੜੀ ਤਰੱਕੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਜੀ So I just want to say a few words on behalf of the congregation of Guru Nanak Gurdwara Smethwick. We thank yourself, Lord Sahota ji. We thank everyone that was involved with looking at this report or review, whatever you want to call it. It's massive seva. It literally is seva because we all know we've been wronged, but we could not think what to do with it. So tusi ikkathe hoye, you got together, you worked on it, but every challenge brings an opportunity, and the opportunity for us, we were talking about it just earlier, that we, you know, with all the issues we're facing today, even this week, if we look at the flood situation in Punjab, all these things are happening to us and we're not addressing them. This infighting, as they call it, they've picked on our own personal issues. Kide nahi issue hunde ghar ch hunde, every family has issues, right? So we as the panth, like everyone makes the panth up and every family has issues, so does the panth. But the thing is, if we can stand together like we have done today and with your guys' hard work, this has taught us today that actually we can work together. And with all the differences we've had in the past, we need to kind of all get together and start addressing these issues, like you guys have set a milestone today, I think. So thank you to everyone that's come. Thanks for inviting us. We were very worried that what we're signing up to, but listening to what you were saying today, I think we can all say that, yeah, we sign up to this, and the Sangatam would be happy with the work you've done. Inna kenda das kemala jachek Vaheguru ji ka khalsa Vaheguru ji ki fateh.
Khalsa Vaheguru ji ki fateh. First of all, I'd like to thank Baldeep Singh for giving me this very honourable opportunity. Thank you. And as you said, Baji, it is seva. It's been a great seva. As an immigrant Sikh and a daughter of an immigrant Sikh, I feel it's our duty, absolute duty. And when I first started reading the report, and I'm sure like everybody else, you can't help feeling angry. And it's so important. And what I've seen is that people have not presented or articulated their position through anger. It's been done peacefully. And that's what we should be really proud of. I'm proud to be a Sikh, a British Sikh, and as an academic, I'm so proud of what our Sikh students are achieving at universities. And I always try to work with our Sikh students to protect their identity, and I think it's really important, and that's what we're doing here. We have so much to be proud of. Thank you so much for this, Seva. It's been a great honour.
I grew up with my grandfather and my father, which said, "Tel dekho, tel di tar dekho." I think we need to understand what that concept means. I spent 13 years in Number 10 as a policy maker, as a strategist. I think we need to look at our nishana. Our nishana isn't bloom entirely, but the response has been immense. It is something that's unprecedented, and it will have reverberations across the government machinery, I would say. The nishana is Michael Gove. He is the guy who's paying the piper here. He who pays the piper calls the tune. A number of things were said by Lord Singh this morning that we need to understand the context in which this is couched. I think the couching of this is also important in the sense that the wider picture suggests there are national interests at stake, and we are the collateral damage as a community. The narrative has been set for us in a number of spheres, including the House of Commons. A Conservative MP, who should remain nameless here, a London MP, has targeted Sikhs openly for the first time, and there were responses to that from, quite rightly, from the opposite bench. I think we need to understand where this is headed. The previous Home Secretary said a few things in the United States at a press conference that also maligned the Sikh identity. This is a narrative that's being written and it's gone unchallenged, and this is the first challenge it's received. I think it needs to be understood in that context, and we are here as law-abiding, and the plaudits in the report are something we should embrace. And the key thing for me is nirpo nirvair. This is what this community is about. We stand up to the oppressed, for the oppressed, and for the first time, what I'm seeing, it saddens me that we're spending so much of our own resources trying to protect our own identity when so many people outside of our communities need our help, here and overseas. And I applaud you and I thank you for holding the 1 minute silence for the people in Punjab, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslim, Christians, and non-believers. Thank you. Vaheguru Ji Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. ਸਾਧ ਸੰਗਤ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਦੇਖੋ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਜੀ ਪਾਰ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਸੋਹਣਾ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਿਕ ਦੇਣਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਿਕ ਕਿਉਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਰੀ ਕੌਮ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਵਿਊ ਹੋਣਗੇ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਰਲ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਸਿੱਧਾ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਤੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰਨ। ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਫੇਰ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਇਹ ਕੰਮ ਅੱਜ ਕੀਤਾ। ਇਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੇ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਹਜੇ ਕਰਨਾ ਸੀ ਜੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰਨ ਇਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਲੈਣੀ ਪੈਣਗੀ ਵਾਪਸ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਤਾਈ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸੇਵਾ ਇਹ ਲਈ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਕਰਨ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ ਚ ਰੱਖਣ। ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਨਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਨਾ ਵੱਡੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਸਮਾਗਮਾਂ ਤੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਾਗਮ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਨਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਨਰ ਕਰੋ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੌਮ ਦਾ ਕੁਝ ਸਵਾਰਿਆ ਵਾ ਤੇ ਸਿੱਧਾ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਤੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਪੱਖ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕੀਤੇ। ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਤੇ ਬਲਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੁਣਾਂ ਦਾ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਫੇਰ ਕਰ ਦੇਵਾਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਫੋਨ ਕਾਲ ਤੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਸੁਨੇਹਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ। ਸਾਡੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਤਿਹ ਜੀ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today, here in the House of Lords, we've heard from the Council of Sikhs in Law their judgment on the Blue Review. It has been absolutely brilliant to see all the Jathebandis coming together and absolutely collectively producing a phenomenal report which will now be placed to government at the highest levels in the Labour Party, of course across Conservatives and the SNP and the Liberal Democrats, This report really counters all the narrative that Bloom has used. What's very clear though, Bloom's report was independent. It wasn't something, the government has distanced itself from it, because I tabled a number of parliamentary questions and they mentioned that in this report, where the government actually says everything that's contained in Bloom is his views, it's his opinions, and he was given independence to undertake that. What's really concerning to me is, was taxpayers' money used to produce this report, because it clearly went out of the terms of reference. Sikhs need to be working together. As the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for British Sikhs, I'm always keen to engage with every single jathebandi, and what this has shown is we can come together collectively as a form and we can counter some of these issues. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Baldeep Singh. I'm a barrister and chair of Sikhs in Law. Today we had a momentous occasion at the House of Lords, hosted by Lord Sahota, in the handing down of our review by the Select Committee on the Colin Bloom report. I want to thank each and every jathebandi and organisation that came together to provide written and oral submissions when we dealt with this case. What this has highlighted to us is that together, in unity, we can achieve anything. Thank you very much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today's been a momentous day in the House of Lords. As a collective, as a community, as a panth, we've come together and we've heard the deliberation from the Select Committee of the Sikhs in Law on the Bloom Review. Now this is an important challenge and a rebuttal back to the Bloom Review. The Bloom Review, released back in April, has caused mass concern for the Sikh community, particularly its attack on the Sikh community and the reputation of the Sikh community. So this first rebuttal from the community is massive, and I'm grateful to the Select Committee of the Sikhs in Law for this deliberation and sharing their findings with us. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. ਸੋ ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਦੇਣੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਹਾਊਸ ਆਫ ਲੋਰਡਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਇਕੱਠ ਲੋਰਡਸ ਸਹੋਤਾ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਕਾਲਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਲੂਮ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਕੀਤਾ, ਇੰਡੀਪੈਂਡੈਂਟ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਫਰਮ ਸਿੱਖਸ ਇਨ ਲੋ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਜਨਤਕ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ, ਜਾਂ they actually started the proceedings on this report. And so ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ came and represented here. So ਅਲੱਗ-ਅਲੱਗ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦੇ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ, ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਾਈਂਡਿੰਗਸ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਨ ਐਗਰੀਐਂਸ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬਣਾਈ ਗਈ ਆ ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਨੈਗੇਟਿਵ ਆ, ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੱਖ ਆ ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਐਂਟੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਪੱਖ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਹੋਰ ਧਰਮਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ 2-3 ਪੇਜ ਹੀ ਸੀ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ, ਤੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ 15 ਪੇਜ ਸੀ, ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਨੈਗੇਟਿਵਿਟੀ ਪਾਈ ਗਈ ਸੀ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵਧਾਈ ਦੇਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਦੇਖੋ ਬਹੁਤ ਚਿਰਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਛ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗੇ ਹਾਂ। ਜੋ ਆਪਣੇ 'ਤੇ ਹਮਲੇ ਹੋ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਸਾਰੇ ਪਾਸਿਓਂ, whether it be in the UK, ਪੰਜਾਬ 'ਚ ਸਾਰੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਲੜਾਂਗੇ ਦੈਨ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤੀਆਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਇਹ ਰੈਕਗਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਨਫਾਈਟਿੰਗ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਸੀ, ਦੇਖੋ ਇਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ 'ਚ ਪਿਕਅਪ ਕੀਤੀ ਗਈ, ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੀ ਕੁਛ ਕੁ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੱਸੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਜੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਇਨਫਾਈਟਿੰਗ ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੇਖੋ ਇਨਫਾਈਟਿੰਗ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ, ਸੋ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਆ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਹ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਇਹਦੇ ਥਰੂ ਓਪਰਚੁਨਿਟੀ ਆਈ ਆ ਸਾਧ ਜੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਲਈ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਚੱਲੀਏ ਅਤੇ ਪ੍ਰਾਪਤੀਆਂ ਕਰੀਏ। ਇੰਨਾ ਹੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਦਾਸ ਖਿਮਾ ਦਾ ਚ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। I think it's really important for us to remember that as a Sikh, we not only give 10% of our earnings to the Sikh Panth, but we also give 10% of our time as a minimum. And we have witnessed today, Sikhs in Law have come together and brought everybody together here, which is important to address the issues that affect each one of us. As Sikhs in Law, our aim is to promote, encourage and develop the legal profession and judiciary within the UK Sikh community. And as an organisation, one of our objectives is to raise the Sikh profile within the legal sphere and to ensure responsible and respectful coverage of the Sikh community. An example of that is what we have witnessed today here. and it is important that we do come together to address these issues that do affect all of us.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So the Sikh community from around the UK has come together at the House of Lords today. They're united in the concern at the Bloom report published by the UK government, which gives an unfair judgment of the Sikh community. A collective response has been given by an expert panel of academics and lawyers, and it is our sincere hope that the UK government considers this and withdraws the Bloom report. It is deeply unfortunate that while this meeting, chaired by Lord Sahota at the House of Lords with representatives from all major Sikh communities, is taking place, that the government have held their own meeting, not even inviting Sikh parliamentarians, let alone any organisations, with no transparency around who's involved in that process. So that is the kind of actions that lead to distrust between people, between communities, between religious groups and the government, and it is our sincere hope that the government engages with the report and the findings presented to them by the Council of Sikhs in Law. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Guru Pyari Saਧ Sangat ਜੀ, ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਡੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਜਾਰੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੀਮਿਸਟ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੁਝ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਲੇਬਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਸਾਰੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਰਿਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਲਿਖਿਆ। ਸੋ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬੜੀ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਏ, ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਪੜ੍ਹੇ ਲਿਖੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਤੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ। ਇਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆਏ ਆ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਦਾ ਕਵੀ ਦਰਬਾਰ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਟਰਾਂਸਲੇਸ਼ਨਾਂ ਚੱਲਦੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਸੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੀਆਂ। ਸੋ ਗੱਲ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਸੰਤ ਸਿਪਾਹੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਆ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਵਿਦਵਾਨ ਬਣੀਏ, ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਲਿਖਤੀ ਰੂਪ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕਰੀਏ। ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਨੇ ਜ਼ਫਰਨਾਮਾ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਔਰੰਗਜ਼ੇਬ ਨੇ ਚੜ੍ਹਾਈ ਕਰਾਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ। ਸੋ ਉਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਮਿਹਨਤ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਆ। ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਗਾਂਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਕੀ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ, ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਕੜੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਓਟ ਆਸਰੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਤੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਹੀ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ। ਸੋ ਬੜੀ ਵਧਾਈ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਸਿੱਖਸ ਇਨ ਲਾਅ ਤੇ ਸਿੱਖਸ ਇਨ ਐਕੈਡਮੀਆ, ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਜਿੰਨੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਇਨਵੋਲਡ ਆ। ਸੋ ਮਾਰੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੀ ਕਲਾ 'ਚ ਰੱਖਣ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Baldeep Singh. I'm a barrister and also the chair of Sikhs in Law. I want to thank SIKH CHANNEL and Kam Singh for supporting this event and recording this momentous occasion. I want to thank all of the Sikh community and the Jathebandi that are supported not only by providing written and oral submissions to the review that we've conducted of the Bloom report, but also by attending today and supporting the event. Thank you very much.